As we know, in order to reuse, we usually componentize as much as possible. So, if we look at any of our screens, in general, they correspond to several objects interacting and not just one. For example, it's the case of a web panel like the one we saw in the initial course of Genexis, which listed the tourist attractions that a travel agency offered to visit. We won't deal here with the design, which is barely outlined and needs more work. We're viewing a screen that's not too complex, which will have an entire part coming from the master panel and its own part. In the latter, some parts are implemented, in turn, as components, although this is not noticeable at runtime. We can filter by country and also by name of attraction. But what's most interesting, and what will allow us to introduce the topic of this video, is that we've added the possibility of selecting tourist attractions as favorites. For example, I'll select this one, and this one. In other words, we've marked two favorite attractions. However, if we look up here, it shows 0, as if we didn't have any favorites. We refresh the screen, and now we see this number is 2. If I remove a favorite, this number should be refreshed to 1. Our guiding question is, how do we get that value to update automatically as each attraction is selected or deselected as a favorite? We go to Genexis to see this web panel. We see, first of all, that it has an associated master panel, which is the default. Therefore, the content of its screen will be loaded in the content placeholder of the master page. And out of it will be all this other stuff. In particular, we have two components, a default one, which implements the recent links, and another one that we've added to show the total number of tourist attractions that the user has selected as favorite. To save the attractions that a user has selected as favorite, we should have a users table to indicate each user's favorite attractions. If we don't want to work with users yet, for example, because we haven't applied GAM yet, and we're still figuring out if we are going to have our own users table or not, then we can temporarily keep favorites per browser instance. For this, we've created this transaction with this attribute, to which we've specified this new domain that we've also created with the same data type as this property. Client information is an external object of the Genexis module, whose ID property allows identifying the client device that's running, both natively and on the web. In the case of web applications, the property returns a user ID, which persists between all sessions with the same browser and for the same application. So what we've done is to add a transaction with a key made up of the device and the tourist attraction. In the table of this transaction, we'll save the favorites. If we look at the web component being loaded here in the webmaster panel, we can see that it only contains a text block with this name, whose caption is loaded at runtime. Initially, only in the start event, invoking this subroutine that first calculates the number of tourist attractions for this client, which are in the table containing these two attributes, which is favorite attraction. Here's the value we're looking for. Then we turn that numeric value into a string to assign it to the text block that will be displayed. And to show it with the favorite image and in the right color and format, we've added two classes to the corresponding theme, which in this case is Carmine. If the number of attractions is 0, to the text block, we assign the class that designs the empty favorite, and otherwise, the one that designs the filled yellow favorite. For this, we had to previously insert two images in the KB. If we look at the classes in the theme, the background image property shows the filled yellow heart, and for this other class, the empty gray heart. So this text block calculates the number and displays it with the appropriate background image and colors. This start event will be triggered when the master panel is opened. On the other hand, if we look at what will be loaded in the content placeholder for our web panel, we can see that it's a screen with this combo box to choose a country. And below it, we have another component to which the value of that country is sent every time we modify it. And if we look at what's being loaded in that web component, it's this other web object of the component type, which has a grid that filters the tourist attractions it'll show, according to the country received by parameter and the filters on the screen itself. We've chosen a flex grid, which contains a canvas table, in order to overlap the tourist attraction photo with its name and an image to allow the user to select or deselect the attraction as a favorite. We won't dwell on the design of all this. Just note that in the load event of the grid, which has attraction as its base table, for each tourist attraction to be loaded, this for each command is executed, which searches in the subordinate table, favorite attraction, if there is a record for this device, the one that's running. If it exists, it means that the attraction is a favorite, and therefore the image with a filled heart is loaded. Otherwise, the empty heart is loaded. But from all this, what really matters to us is something else: programming of the click event on this image. Once the attractions grid is loaded, when the user clicks on an attraction favorite, we call a procedure that checks if the attraction was already a favorite, in which case it removes it from the table and indicates the operation to switch the image for the empty one. And if it's the other way around, it does the opposite, which is to insert. By doing this, the favorite total should be updated, but it's not. In short, this event is triggered in a web component inside this web panel, which in turn runs inside this web master panel. Where the component we want to be refreshed is also created. In other words, we want a user event of a component loaded in this panel to perform an action on a component with which it has no other relationship than being indirectly involved in the same screen. To enable the interaction, all KBs will come with this predefined object, global events, so we can modify it. We could save it under another name and create as many particular objects as we want. In our case, we're going to modify the predefined one, which comes empty, adding an event that we'll call this way. The events added will be able to handle parameters if required for communication between components. Here we only need one to find out that another one triggered it. No parameters are needed. With this global form of communication, let's put it to work. Let's go to the panel that should trigger the event. It'll happen every time the image is clicked on. At that moment, we invoke the global event's external object, the only one that's there at the moment. In this way, the triggering of the event is being reported. Next, what we have to do is to have the component counting the attractions to show them subscribed to this event. In this way, we can listen to it every time it occurs on the screen of the listener. For this, we simply set to listen to the event. And there we program what we want to be executed when the event occurs. In this case, it's to recalculate the number of attractions. Let's try it. Let's deselect and see that it's refreshed. Now we click. Communication is taking place successfully. Although here we saw an example of communication between web panels with components, the same is true for communicating multi-experience panels, for example, for native applications with components. To learn more about this topic, you can visit our wiki.